Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love, 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 wonderful story of love. Though you are far away, wonderful story of love, still he doth call today, calling from Calvary's mountain, down from the crystal bright fountain, e'en from the dawn of creation. Wonderful story of love, 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 wonderful story of love. Jesus provides a rest, wonderful story of love, for all the pure and blessed. Rest in those mansions above us, with those who've gone on before us, singing the rapturous chorus. Wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love. Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be, when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, not a shadow, not a sign. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be, when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory.
All right, so we're in Genesis. This big arc of Abraham goes from chapter 12 to chapter 25. There's a lot about Abraham. He is an important character in the story of Jesus. And so we saw that he left when he was called. So Abraham went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. He was 75 years old. He left Haran, or he left Ur and went to Haran. Then he left Haran and went to Canaan. And that is where we're at in this story in chapter 26. After spending some time in Canaan, he goes to the Negev desert in the lower part of what would eventually be Israel. And then because of a drought, you'll recall, he leaves there and goes to Egypt for a time. And that's where we're going to pick up in chapter 13 in just a minute, is him leaving Egypt and going back toward the Negev. Before we do that, though, remembering that Abraham was called a friend of God, remembering that he becomes the father of all those who act by faith according to the scriptures. We looked at Isaiah 41, 2 Chronicles 20, James 2, and I want to look now at Galatians chapter 3. And so if you'll turn to Galatians 3 in connection with this idea and connecting Abraham to ourselves, so that we understand that as we read this story of Abraham and we learn these things about his character, part of the reason that it's so important is because it is if we become his children, then we also are friends of God. And so the letter that's written in Galatians chapter 3, verses 5 through 9, it says, "Does he who supplies the Spirit to you and works miracles among you do so by works of the law or by hearing with faith? Just as Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Know then that it is those of faith who are the sons of Abraham." And that becomes really important when you read through the Gospels. And oftentimes the children of Israel, when they are exchanging with Jesus, talk about themselves as being the children of Abraham, or as Abraham being their father. And he tells them on multiple occasions, you're not of Abraham. If you were of Abraham, you would believe me. It's not the physical lineage of Abraham that's connected to the promises that were given to Abraham. It's the faith of Abraham that's connected. Know then that it's those of faith who are the sons of Abraham, and the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, "In you shall all the nations be blessed." So then those who are of faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. And so as we see his faith displayed in this story that's recorded in the book of Genesis for us, we're supposed to be picking up on the nature of his faith and what it caused him to do and how it caused him to live and how it caused him to value things. Because if we share in that faith, then we also share in what? The promises made to him. If we don't share in his faith, then guess what? We have no part of the promises that were made to him. And real quickly, go back to Romans chapter 4, and we're going to start reading in verse 13. And listen to how it's put here. "For the promise to Abraham and his offspring," now we just read who those offspring are, right? The ones who are the offspring of Abraham are who? The ones who share in his faith. "The promise to Abraham and to his offspring that would be the heir of the world did not come through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if it is the adherents of the law who are to be heirs, faith is null and the promise is void." I'll also just kind of add this just to make sure that you're thinking about it. Abraham predated the law. The law had not been given at the time of Abraham. But what had happened was it had been given through Moses to the physical descendants of Abraham, and they started thinking that they were something special. And that's what he's trying to deal with here. No, it's not the law and it's not you. The law brings wrath, but where there is no law, there is no transgression. That is why it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be granted to all his offspring, not only to the adherent of the law, but also to the one who shares in the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. As it is written, "I have made you the father of many nations," in the presence of God in whom he believed, who gives life to the dead and calls into existence things that do not exist. And so he became the father of many nations, not just one. And the way that he became the father of many nations is by becoming the father of the faithful. He is the man of faith. We become his offspring and the beneficiaries of the promises made to him by God if we share in the faith that he had. And so that's why this is so important. If we want to be connected to Jesus, if we want to be connected to the salvation that is in Jesus, if we want to be connected to the forgiveness that's in Jesus, if we want to be connected to the grace that comes through Jesus, if we want to be connected to the salvation that comes through Jesus, we need to have a faith like Abraham's. So let's go back now to our study in Genesis. Yes, sir.
Before you go any further on that, just a point of you might mention, where there is no law, there's no transgression. I think that needs a little bit of explanation because there's always transgression under God's law, whether it be under Moses' law or not, and it goes all the way back to, as we know, the first sin that ever committed. So we're not talking about sin in essence in this particular matter.
Well, what we're talking about is where God hasn't told man what he should do or not do, man can't know. Where there is no law, where God hasn't spoken, there is no law. We can't. So when you get to another portion of the discussion about the law of Moses, for instance, why the law then? The question is asked. It came because of transgression. It came to let man be aware of his transgression, to make man aware of his sin. So in an absolute sense, yes, the sin exists, but if I don't have any way of knowing about it, then I don't realize I'm doing anything wrong unless God revealed it. That's what the law was for, to shut up men under sin.
But I know that's exactly what I'm going
Right.
back, all the way back to Adam and Eve, because God did speak.
He did. Absolutely. And that's also what is being spoken about in Acts 17. The times of ignorance, God once winked, but now he's declaring that all men everywhere must repent. There was a time when men didn't know some things because not all things had been revealed. And where there is no law, there is no sin. That is not ignorance of the law. That doesn't mean just because I don't know about the law. It means where a law hasn't been given. But when a law has been given, I become responsible for knowing the law and doing what is right, which is why God is now declaring that all men everywhere must repent. The law was given specifically to who?
When you use a definite article, the law, you
Talking about the law of Moses.
it was given to the descendants of Abraham through Isaac.
That's right. It was given and through Jacob, even more specifically, to the 12 tribes of Israel. That's who the law of Moses was given to. There were some proselytes outside of that group to the law, but were they obligated to the law, or were they choosing of their own free will to follow the law? They were choosing of their own free will to follow the law. The Israelites were obligated to the law. They didn't have a choice. It was given to them. They were responsible for it. They had to follow it. If they didn't follow it, they were guilty of what? Sin. What about all those Gentiles that never heard the law of Moses? Were they obligated to keep the commandments and to offer the sacrifices and to follow the dietary restrictions and do all those things? Absolutely not. Now, were they still shut up under sin? Yeah, but what? They didn't always know it. Which is why, from time to time, God did send them prophets, right? Who did Jonah prophesy to? The people of Nineveh. Were they Israelites? No, they were from what nation? They were Syrians. And yet God sent a prophet there and told them that they needed to do what? Repent. They became obligated to do what God told them to do through Jonah. And by the way, they did repent, right? For a while. And then they reverted back and they eventually were judged by God. when it talks about what he's pointing out here, the whole point of Romans 4 is saying this: how many of us are going to be saved by the law? None of us. How are we going to be saved?
By grace through faith.
By grace through faith. And faith without works is dead. So don't think that that means that there's not anything to do. It doesn't mean that at all. It simply means that it's not through perfect law keeping, or it's not even through the law of Moses that salvation came. Salvation predates the law. That's another argument that's made in another place, that the promise was made to Abraham 400 years before the law. So the law had a purpose, and it had a job to do, and it tells us about the righteousness of God, and it shuts us up under sin and makes us aware of our obligations to God. But ultimately, what we need is the kind of faith that Abraham had. Now, by the way, let's recount that again. What kind of faith did Abraham have? Genesis 12:4. So Abraham went. Did he know where he was going? Did he know why he needed to go? Did he know anything other than the fact that God said, pack up and go? No. But what did he do? He went. That is trusting God to do what God says, when God says, whether I understand all the particulars or not, in terms of the whys and the wherefores and the wheres. He didn't know why he was being sent anywhere. He didn't know what God had in store. Had God made the promise to him yet? No. God just said, go to a land that I will show you. And Abraham packs up everything, leaves his family, leaves his homeland, leaves where he's been for 75 years, and goes. And that was no small task. We talked about that at length last week. He owned a lot of stuff and had a lot of servants. He picked up a few more in chapter 12 too, right? You remember that? He got some from the Pharaoh in Egypt. So it says in chapter 13, Abraham went up from Egypt to the Negev. And so if you're looking on the map behind me, he's been down here in Egypt. He's traveling back now and going this way. He's eventually going to work up to the same place that he was at between Bethel and Ai. So when he left and came to Shechem, the next place he stopped was between Bethel and Ai. That's where he's headed back to in chapter 13. He and his wife and all that belonged to him and Lot with him. Now Abraham was very rich in livestock. Anybody ever watch old westerns from the 30s and 40s? Almost all of those old westerns were based where? On a cattle drive. Was it easy to drive cattle? I want you to read this again with me and let it sink in. Abraham was very rich in livestock. When he started moving, he wasn't just moving people. You know what else he was moving? Livestock. Not a little bit of livestock. A whole lot of livestock. This is a big ordeal for him to move. And he's traveling a good distance. He was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. That stuff is heavy and cumbersome. And people had to haul it around. And he took it all with him. He went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly. And there Abraham called on the name of the Lord. So you'll remember the story. He travels there. He gets there. He builds an altar to God and he offers worship to God. He goes down to Negev. There's a famine. He goes over to Egypt, stays there for a while, gets fed, gets food, gets what he needs, leaves Egypt, goes back to where he built that altar, and what's the very next thing he does? He worships God. Do you see something about Abraham and his pattern of life? What is a regular occurrence in the story of Abraham? He worships God. That's another characteristic of the faithful. If we forsake worshiping God, do we have Abraham's faith? Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. Lot was not a poor man either. And they're all traveling together. So this is just more stuff and more people. You ever traveled with people? How hard is that? How hard is it to stay together? And what happens if somebody gets lost? Or if somebody has a problem? If you're traveling together and somebody has a problem, do you just keep going and let them fend for themselves? So we've got a lot of people and they're all traveling together. They've got lots of cattle. They've got lots of livestock. They've got lots of stuff and lots of tents and lots of tackle to carry with them. They've got food. They've got all of this stuff and all of these people. And anytime there is a problem that necessitates stopping, by the way, how many pit stops do you have to make when you got just one carload of people? We're talking about, I don't know how many, I don't think they're ever named, but I'll promise you this, we're talking about hundreds of people. How many pit stops do they have to make? This is not easy. Why is he there? Instead of back at home in his house? Because God said go, so he went. And you don't know where he's going, and you can see that, right? He's going from this place to this place to this place to way over here to back up here. He don't know where he's going. When he walked through the promised land the first time, God did tell him what? This is the land where your descendants are going to be. But does he yet know where he's supposed to be? He's just going, listening to God. Lot's following along behind him. Lot's a righteous man. He's declared a righteous man in the scriptures. Why is Lot a righteous man? He did decide to be, but what's he doing here? He's following Abraham. And Abraham's following God. And I spoke about this, if it wasn't last week, it was a week before last, but I think it was last week. When Paul, you'll remember, wrote one letter, he says, follow me as I follow Christ. It's kind of the same thing here. Where's Lot's dad? Back home. He's with his uncle. Away from home. How many of y'all want to walk away from your houses and start living essentially a nomadic life? Carrying tents around, driving everything, carrying everything you own everywhere you go, pitching tents, staying for a while, breaking camp, carrying it all, going the next 100, 200, 300,000 miles, finding another place, camping. Is that any kind of fun life? I'll tell you what, we wouldn't make it a day. Most of us wouldn't make it a day. We'd have never got to the edge of town because, again, how were they going? They were walking. We wouldn't have made it to the edge of town. We'd have got to the edge of the neighborhood and said, "Yeah, let's go home. This is too hard. It's hot." The land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. There was strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanite and the Perizzites were dwelling then in the land. So they get back up here into Canaan, into this area, and they're back up in this area right here. But they have so many people and so much livestock, there's not enough land to support them all if they stay together. And so the herdsmen of Abraham and the herdsmen of Lot start squabbling with each other. What do you think they're squabbling over?
Just like the Jews, they're complaining that things aren't fun.
Grazing territory.
Yeah.
They're squabbling over where they're going to let their livestock graze and where they're going to let their livestock get water. And if they're providing water for their livestock by drawing it out of a well, who wants to draw that much water for that much livestock? Or to start drawing water for the livestock that you're charged to care for, and then somebody else's livestock come and drink it all. And so they start squabbling with each other because this group is responsible for Lot's herds, this group's responsible for Abraham's herds, and there's not enough land and water to sustain them all. So they're fighting over it. And that's what people do. Abraham said to Lot, "Please, let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers." By brothers, he means what? Kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I'll go to the right. If to the right, then I will go to the left. I'm going to stop there for just a moment, because this is another place where we see the character of Abraham shining through. What does Abraham do here? Okay. First off, Abraham is acting as a peacemaker, is he not? Would that not become a cornerstone of Jesus' teaching? So first thing is Abraham's acting as a peacemaker. And the way he's going to do that is by doing what? No, first off, let's establish a few facts. Who's older, Abraham or Lot? Who's more significant in family standing? The uncle or the nephew? The uncle. Who's richer, Abraham or Lot? Who's got more stuff? Who's got more flocks? Now, let's be honest. Don't lie. Let's be honest. You've got more stuff. You've got more people. You've got more flocks. And everybody's squabbling. You say, okay, look, we got to quit squabbling. Look, I need this land over here because I've got more flocks. You got fewer. You go find a smaller area somewhere else where you can feed your flocks and let me have this. Is that what Abraham did? No, what did he say? Here's all the land before you. You decide where you're going to go, and I'll go the other direction. How many of us are willing to sacrifice control like that? What would we be afraid of? We would be afraid that we would get the smaller place, the place without as good of grass, the place without as much water, the place that was harder to do the job, that we would get the short end of the stick. Or what was it, the raw end of the deal? Is that how you put it? See, we want to retain control, right? They teach you that, by the way, in negotiation. They tell you to go in there and position yourself so that you have the control of the negotiations. That's how you win. Abraham gave all that away right up the top. He says, look, I don't want us all squabbling. We're kinsmen. Tell you what, decide where you want to go. You pick, you go, and I'll find what's left for mine. Yes, ma'am.
Earlier in business, I was taught by a very successful man to never be the key, but be the key maker. And to a small degree, that's what Abraham was doing, but he was doing it all from his heart. Yeah.
So then it says, after he tells Lot that, Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the valley of the Jordan. So we've got this area here. This is the Jordan River. What do we know about rivers? They have They have water and sediment. And in fact, when you get over here to Egypt, the Nile River, this is the Nile River Delta, this area right over here on this map. That was extremely fertile land. It's the areas near the river. Now see, this is just dry, arid. A lot of this is dry and arid. If you get along the coast over here, it's not so dry and arid. And if you get along the river right here, it's not so dry. And a lot of this is dry and arid. Not a lot of water, not a lot of grass. Lot looks at this land right here by the Jordan River. He does exactly what we would expect someone to do. It was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Like the garden of the Lord. This area is described as being like Eden. Well watered, lots of plants. Like the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. There are some really rich and fertile parts of Egypt. Everything close to the Nile River. The Nile River once a year does what? It floods. And what does it leave behind? A lot of rich dirt. Very fertile. A lot of water and good ground. He says this area is like the Garden of Eden. It's like the rich, fertile areas of Egypt. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan. He did exactly what men do. You give me the choice. What am I going to take? The choice land. That's why it's called choice. Because it's what people would do what? Choose. So he does that. Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Abraham settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. What Lot was not considering was what? The people and the problems that come with those kind of people. There are some wealthy places that you can move, places you can go that are very promising, where you can make a lot of money. Doesn't mean it's a good place to be. The men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. The Lord said to Abraham after Lot had separated from him, "Now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward." So he's gone into the land of Canaan over here. And God tells him when he gets out here, I want you to look to the north, I want you to look to the south, I want you to look to the east, and I want you to look to the west. I want you to look. All the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth. That is not a derogatory thing. What's he saying when he says, I'll make them as the dust of the earth?
Numerous.
Extremely numerous. How much dust is in your house? That's a minuscule, tiny fraction of the dust of the earth. Standing in a dry, arid place like Canaan, how much dust is there? You ever see these guys? Well, again, I'll go back to my old westerns. When they're traveling across West Texas or Kansas or New Mexico or whatever setting it's supposed to be in, what do they have on their faces? A bandana wrapped around. Why do they do that? So they don't have to breathe the dust. Because there's so much of it. And it's blowing all over the place. And it gets in everything. And everywhere. During the Dust Bowl in the 30s here in the United States, people would wet towels and line the edges of their doors and windows trying to keep the dust out. And it still got in their houses. And what God is saying is, you're going to have as many descendants as there is dust on the ground. So that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, we'll just do this. What is it? Sycamore Point. That's got some sand, right? I've been there once or twice. I think there's some sand down there. If not, Holly Beach has got some sand. Or even the little lake in Lake Charles got a little beach. Got some sand. Tell me how many grains of sand on that beach. Little bitty tiny beach. How many grains of sand are there? Yeah, a lot don't work. Number them. Give me a number. Yeah, we don't know. You couldn't count. If you tried to count, you would never be able to do it. That's his point. Yeah. That's his point. If anybody can number the dust, they're going to be able to number your descendants. Now, did the nation of Israel ever turn into the most populous nation in the world? No. Did they grow? Yeah. Were they big? Yeah. Did they become powerful? Yeah. But a lot of nations have a... What's he talking about here then? When he says, your descendants are going to be as the dust of the earth. All the faithful of all time. All the faithful who come after him. Those are the children of Abraham. Now, here's the question for you. When you think about the number of the faithful being so numerous that they can't be numbered, should we ever get like the prophet and sit down underneath the tree and pout because we're the only faithful person left? What we should do is believe God. Did he make the descendants of Abraham like the dust of the earth or not? And if we're going to have the kind of faith that Abraham had, then we need to believe and live based on that belief. Arise, he says, walk about the land through its length and its breadth, for I'll give it to you. Abraham moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. That is right down here. This is Hebron. He gets to his new place. What's the first thing he does? Builds an altar and worships God. Do you see the contrast between him and Lot? Lot goes to a place, and we're told the place that he ends up settling was full of wicked men. And does it say anything about Lot building an altar and worshiping God? But Abraham, wherever he goes, first thing he does is worship God. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. By the way, Lot's going to find out exactly what thieves will break in and steal before this story's over. It's going to be a teaching moment for Lot. By the way, Lot's a righteous man. I want you to understand that. I mentioned that earlier. We are told that. He's called righteous Lot by God. So do righteous people sometimes make bad choices? Yeah. Do we have to deal with the consequences of those choices? Yep. God doesn't shield us from the consequences of our choices. What should we do when we make a bad choice and have to deal with the consequences of that choice? What should we do? Learn from it.
Don't go back.
Learn the mistake. Grow. Become better, become stronger. Make better choices next time. If Lot would have been smart, Abraham would have said, hey, you can go anywhere you want to go. And Lot would say what? After you. You decide, and I'll go to what's left. May not have changed where he ended up. We'll never know that. But Lot, for just that moment, became fixated on the beauty of what he saw. He saw a fertile land that was rich in pasture. He knew it would be good for his flocks. He knew he could become wealthy there. He headed out. That's what he chose. And we're going to see what he reaps for that choice. Any other questions or comments about chapter 13 before we close out? Got to stop. I just looked at the clock. We're actually past time. Anything? All right, then if all goes well, next time, Lord willing, we'll be in chapter 14.
Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story.